The screens flickered with dying light as High Chancellor Vex Thar watched his world burn. Through the observation deck of the orbital station, he could see the Korthak ships descending like locusts upon the last remaining cities of his people. The Velerans had fought for 3 years, but it was over now. 2 of their 3 worlds were already gone, consumed entirely by the swarm. Vexthar's hands trembled as he prepared the final transmission. His people were poets, philosophers, builders of beautiful things. They were not warriors. They had tried to become warriors when the Korthak came, but it was too late. The insectoid swarm did not negotiate. They did not trade. They simply consumed everything in their path and moved to the next system. Commander Thilrax stood beside him, his aquatic features drawn tight with exhaustion. The military commander had lost his entire family when the Second World fell. Now he commanded a fleet of barely 30 ships against thousands of Korthak biovessels. "Send it," Thilrax said quietly. "Let the galaxy know we existed. Let them know we tried." 2. Vexithar activated the transmission array. The message would broadcast on all known frequencies, traveling through space in every direction. It was not a call for help. The Valorans knew no help would come. It was a surrender, offered to anyone who might listen. Perhaps if they surrendered, the Korthak would show mercy to the civilians. Perhaps some small fragment of their civilization could survive. The Chancellor spoke into the recorder, his voice steady despite his breaking heart. "This is High Chancellor Vex Thar of the Valoran Collective. Our worlds are fallen. Our fleets are destroyed. We formally surrender to any power that will hear this message. We ask only that mercy be shown to our remaining people. We have children. We have elders. We have harmed no one. Please, if anyone can hear this, remember that we existed. Remember that we were here." The transmission launched into space, carrying with it the death rattle of an entire civilization. Vex Thar sat down heavily, feeling centuries of culture and achievement crumbling around him. In 6 hours, the shields protecting the capital city would fail. Then, it would truly be over. Halfway across the sector, the Terran military starship Indomitable cruised through deep space on a reconnaissance mission. The massive vessel carried 600 Terran Marines, the best soldiers humanity had to offer. They were far from Earth, exploring the outer edges of known space, making contact with new species and mapping new systems. Captain Kang Daehyun sat in his command chair, reviewing reports from the navigation team. He was a hard man, shaped by 15 years of combat across a dozen worlds. His face carried scars from battles he rarely discussed, and his eyes held the weight of soldiers he had lost. But those who served under him knew the truth. Daehyun was hard because the universe demanded it. But he was fair, and he never abandoned his people. Specialist Choi Min-sok suddenly straightened at his communications console. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange. It's a broadcast on multiple frequencies, universal distress signature, but the content is unusual. Put it through," Daehyun ordered. The bridge fell silent as they listened to Vexthar's message. The translation software worked through the alien language, converting it to Korean and English in real time. When it finished, nobody spoke for a long moment. Lieutenant Park Ji-woo, Daehyun's second-in-command, pulled up a star chart. "The signal is coming from the Valoran system. It's about 14 light-years from our current position. I'm cross-referencing our databases now." She paused, reading the information. "We have no prior contact with this species. This would be first contact." 3. "They're surrendering," Choi said softly. "Not asking for help, just surrendering." Daehyun stood and walked to the main view screen. "Analysis. What are they facing?" Park's fingers danced across her console. "Scanning the transmission metadata. There are weapon signatures in the background radiation. Bioorganic compounds. Energy readings consistent with..." She stopped, her face going pale. Every officer on the bridge tensed. The Korthak were a nightmare, a hive mind species that consumed entire civilizations. Humanity had encountered them only once before, on the far edge of Terran space. The battle had been brutal, and the Terrans had won only because the Korthak force had been small, just a scouting element. Intelligence suggested the main Korthak swarm numbered in the millions. "Get me Terran command," Daehyun said. "Priority channel." The communication took 20 minutes to establish across the vast distance. Admiral Song appeared on the screen, her expression stern. "Captain Kang. This had better be important." 2. "Admiral, we've intercepted a distress call. An unknown species called the Valorans are being attacked by what we believe is a Korthak swarm. They're surrendering. But we both know the Korthak don't take prisoners. That's 14 light-years out of your operational area, Captain." "Yes, Admiral, it is." Admiral Song studied him for a long moment. "Captain Kang, I know what you're thinking, but we cannot commit 600 Marines to a battle against an unknown Korthak force size. The risk is too great. Admiral, this is first contact with a new species. The Valorans are going to be wiped out. If we do nothing, we're allowing genocide. If you engage and lose the Indomitable, you're throwing away 600 of humanity's best soldiers. The Council will never approve this." Daehyun's jaw tightened. "Admiral, the Valorans think surrender will save them. They don't know the Korthak consume everything. They're about to die believing that mercy exists in this universe. We can show them it does. We can show them that someone gives a damn." The Admiral was quiet for a long time. Finally, she sighed. "You have 48 hours to assess the situation. If you can make a difference, you are authorized to engage. But Kang, if this goes wrong, there won't be anyone coming to save you." "Understood, Admiral." Daehyun turned to his crew. "Navigation. Plot a course for the Valoran system. Maximum FTL speed. Tactical. I want full battle readiness. All Marines to combat stations. Communications. Keep monitoring that signal." Lieutenant Park stepped beside him. "Sir, we're really doing this?" "They sent out a message hoping someone would hear it," Daehyun said quietly. "Someone did. We're not going to let them die alone." The Indomitable's engines flared to life, and the massive ship turned toward the Valoran system. In the communications bay, Specialist Choi continued monitoring the Valoran broadcasts. What he heard next made his blood run cold. The transmissions were getting weaker. Cities were falling one by one. The voices of the Valorans were filled with terror and resignation. And then, just before the Indomitable jumped to FTL, one final message came through. "We are grateful someone heard us, even if only to witness our end." Choi looked up at the captain on his screen relay. "Sir, I don't think we're going to make it in time." Daehyun's expression hardened. "Then, we'd better move faster. All hands. Brace for emergency FTL. We're not letting them die." The Indomitable vanished into faster-than-light travel, racing toward a battle that would change the galaxy forever. The Indomitable dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Valoran system, and Captain Kang Daehyun immediately knew they had arrived in hell. The main view screen showed a scene of absolute destruction. Korthak bioships swarmed through space like angry insects, their organic hulls pulsing with sickly light. They were literally eating the Valoran fleet, attaching themselves to ships and converting the metal and organic matter into more Korthak soldiers. "Battle stations," Daehyun ordered calmly. "Tactical analysis." Lieutenant Park worked frantically at her station, counting approximately 400 Korthak vessels of various sizes. Valoran fleet is down to 18 ships, all heavily damaged. The planet below has one remaining city with active shields. Those shields are failing. Estimate 6 hours until complete collapse. Sergeant Lee Hyun-woo entered the bridge, his combat armor already sealed. "Marines are ready, Captain. Just give us a target." Daehyun studied the tactical display. The Korthak hadn't noticed them yet, too focused on finishing off the Valorans. It gave him a moment to think. Every instinct told him this was impossible. 400 enemy ships against one Terran vessel. But humans hadn't become the dominant species in their region of space by accepting impossible odds. Weapons free, Daehyun said. Target the largest Korthak vessels first. Load nuclear-tipped missiles. Show them what Terran weapons can do. The Indomitable's railguns opened fire first. Tungsten slugs traveling at a fraction of light speed slammed into Korthak bioships, punching straight through their organic armor. The Korthak vessels shuddered and died, unable to regenerate from such catastrophic damage. Then, the plasma lances activated. Beams of superheated matter cutting through 3 ships at once. The Korthak swarm turned toward this new threat, confused and angry. They had never encountered weapons like this before. Most species they consumed used energy weapons that their organic armor could adapt to. But Terran weapons were different. Humans used kinetic force and nuclear fire, primitive by some standards, but devastatingly effective. Launch missiles, Daehyun ordered. 20 nuclear warheads shot from the Indomitable's tubes, each one targeting a different Korthak ship. The vacuum of space flashed white as miniature suns bloomed, vaporizing everything within their radius. 40 Korthak vessels died in that first salvo. On the Valoran command station, High Chancellor Vex Thar stared at his screens in disbelief. What is happening? Who are they? Commander Thilrox was already trying to establish communication. Unknown vessel. This is Valoran Command. Identify yourself. Why are you attacking the Korthak? Specialist Choi routed the communication to the bridge. Daehyun activated the response channel. Valoran Command. This is Captain Kang Daehyun, of the Terran marine ship Indomitable. We received your surrender message. Oso. Oso. Then why do you fight? Vexthar asked, his voice breaking. We don't accept your surrender, Daehyun said flatly. And we're not here to watch you die. We're here to make sure you don't have to surrender to anyone. Terran Marines are deploying to your surface now. Hold your shields as long as you can. The Valorans couldn't believe what they were hearing. An alien species they had never met was fighting and dying for them. It made no sense. But there was no time to question it. The Korthak were regrouping, and now they were angry. Sergeant Lee stood in the drop bay with his squad, checking weapons and seals one last time. Corporal Yoon Sunmi adjusted her medical pack, making sure she had enough supplies for both human and alien casualties. Private Nam Jinho tried to control his breathing. This was his first real combat deployment, and he was terrified. Listen up, Lee barked. The Valorans are civilians who tried to be soldiers. They've been fighting for 3 years, and they're at the breaking point. Our job is to show them what real soldiers look like. We hold the line. We don't retreat. We don't break. And we sure as hell don't let bugs eat innocent people. Sir, yes sir, the squad shouted back. Then let's go. Remind the galaxy why humans are feared. The drop pods launched from the Indomitable, screaming through the atmosphere like meteors. They slammed into the ground around the Valoran capital city, and the Marines poured out, weapons ready. What they found was a nightmare. Korthak warriors were everywhere, 12-foot-tall insectoid monsters that moved with terrifying speed. They had already breached the outer districts, and Valoran soldiers were dying trying to hold them back. The Valorans were brave, but they were outmatched. They had energy weapons that barely slowed the Korthak down. Lee's squad opened fire with their assault rifles, and the difference was immediate. Korthak warriors exploded as armor-piercing rounds tore through their carapaces. Grenades turned groups of them into scattered pieces. The Marines moved with practiced efficiency, covering each other, never staying still, always advancing. Private Nam found himself face to face with a Korthak warrior. The creature lunged at him with blade-like limbs. Nam's training took over. He rolled under the attack and fired upward, his rifle emptying an entire magazine into the creature's underside. The Korthak collapsed, ichor pooling around it. First kill, Lee said, pulling Nam to his feet. You'll have 1,000 more before this day is done. Stay sharp. Corporal Yoon found wounded Velaran soldiers hiding in a collapsed building. They looked at her with wide, terrified eyes, not understanding what she was. Yoon pulled out her medical scanner and began treating them, working quickly and efficiently. "I'm here to help," she said, hoping her translator was working. "You're going to be okay." One of the Valoran soldiers, his aquatic features pale with blood loss, stared at her. "You came. You actually came for us." "Of course we did," Yoon said, injecting him with Terran medical gel that would work on most carbon-based life forms. "That's what soldiers do. We protect people who can't protect themselves." Above the planet, the space battle raged on. The Indomitable was taking damage now, but Captain Daehyun kept the ship moving, never staying still long enough for the Korthak to overwhelm them. Lieutenant Park coordinated the defense, her tactical mind working overtime to anticipate enemy movements. "Captain, we have a problem," Park said. "The Korthak are adapting. They're recognizing us as a major threat and diverting forces. I'm reading a massive energy signature building. It's their hive commander." On the largest Korthak bioship, Warrior Prime Zalcor studied the new enemy. These creatures, called Terrans, were dangerous. They fought with a ferocity the swarm had rarely encountered. They used weapons that killed efficiently and without mercy. But most importantly, they fought for a species that was not their own. This was unusual behavior. Most species the Korthak consumed fought only for themselves. They abandoned the weak and fled when possible. But these Terrans had traveled across space to defend strangers. This suggested a hive mentality, but their communication showed they were individuals. It was confusing and concerning. Zalcor made a decision. 40% of the swarm would redirect to eliminate the Terrans. They were too dangerous to ignore. If they succeeded here, they might inspire other species to resist. That could not be allowed. On the ground, Sergeant Lee's squad had established a defensive position at a crucial intersection. Korthak warriors charged them in waves, and the Marines cut them down with disciplined fire. The street was becoming a graveyard of chitin and ichor. A group of Velaran civilians ran past, fleeing toward the inner city. Among them was a small child, moving too slowly. A Korthak warrior broke through the Marine line and lunged toward the child. Private Nam didn't think. He threw himself between them, his combat knife finding the weak point in the warrior's neck joint. The creature thrashed, nearly killing Nam, before finally dying. The child's parents pulled their offspring to safety, looking back at Nam with expressions of pure gratitude. "That was stupid," Lee said, pulling Nam back into position. "Had to be done, sir," Nam replied, reloading his rifle. Lee grinned behind his helmet. "Good answer. Now stay alive so you can do more stupid, brave things." As night fell over the Valoran capital, the Marines had established a solid perimeter. They had lost 12 soldiers, but they had killed thousands of Korthak. The Valorans were beginning to believe they might actually survive this. In orbit, Captain Daehyun reviewed the situation. "Sir," Specialist Choi said quietly, "I'm picking up new signals. Big ones. The Korthak are calling in reinforcements." Daehyun nodded slowly. "Then we'd better get ready. This is about to get a lot worse." The Korthak attacked at dawn with everything they had. Wave after wave of warriors crashed against the Marine defensive line like a living tide. But the Terrans had spent the night preparing, and the Korthak were about to learn why humanity had survived countless wars throughout their history. Sergeant Lee stood at the main choke point, a narrow street between two reinforced buildings. His squad had spent hours setting up overlapping fields of fire, placing charges in strategic locations, and preparing fallback positions. When the Korthak came, they walked straight into a kill zone. "Wait for it," Lee said calmly, as hundreds of Korthak warriors charged down the street. Wait, the creatures were 50 meters away. Then 30, then 20. Now, the street exploded. Charges detonated in sequence, bringing down the buildings on either side and crushing dozens of Korthak under tons of rubble. The survivors pressed forward, only to run into concentrated fire from 3 different angles. The Marines fired in disciplined bursts, making every round count. A Korthak warrior managed to reach the marine line. It was immediately hit with a shotgun blast that removed its head. Another tried to climb the walls. A grenade knocked it back down. The Korthak were fierce and fearless, but the Marines had turned the entire district into a death trap. Private Nam had been rotated to the second line, giving him a moment to breathe. He watched in awe as Sergeant Lee directed the battle like a conductor leading an orchestra. Every Marine knew their role. Every position supported the others. It was beautiful, in a terrible way. A Velaran soldier named Kivran stood beside Nam, holding an energy rifle with shaking hands. "How do you do this?" the Velaran asked. "How do you stay so calm?" "Training," Nam replied, though his own heart was racing. "And knowing that if we break, innocent people die. Can't let that happen." Above the planet, the space battle had evolved into something the Korthak had never experienced. Major Kim Tajin led the fighter wing of the Indomitable, and he flew like a demon. His squadron used tactics that confused and frustrated the Korthak bioships. The Korthak expected straight-line attacks and predictable patterns. Instead, the human fighters used deception. They would feint toward one ship, then attack another. They would pretend to retreat, luring Korthak pursuers into ambushes. They even broadcasted fake signals to make the Korthak think there were more fighters than actually existed. "This is Falcon Lead," Kim said into his comm. "Execute pattern Delta 7. His fighters scattered in what looked like panic. The Korthak ships pursued, sensing an easy kill. Then the fighters suddenly regrouped, surrounding the Korthak pursuers and destroying them in seconds. It was a tactic as old as human warfare itself, and the Korthak had no counter for it. Lieutenant Park watched from the Indomitable's tactical station, analyzing every aspect of the battle. "Captain, the Korthak are getting frustrated. They're used to overwhelming opponents with numbers, but our defensive positions are too strong." "Good," Captain Daehyun replied. "Frustration leads to mistakes. Keep monitoring their patterns. I want to know the moment they change tactics." In the engineering section, Engineer Han Sora was performing what could only be described as alien autopsy. The Marines had brought back intact Korthak corpses, and Han was tearing them apart to understand how they worked. What she discovered was both fascinating and horrifying. "Captain," Han said over the comm, "I've found something. The Korthak use pheromone communication for close-range coordination. It's how they move in such perfect synchronization. If we can disrupt that communication, they'll become disorganized." "Can you develop a countermeasure?" Daehyun asked. "Already working on it." "Give me 4 hours." While the battle raged, something unexpected was happening on the ground. The Valorans were watching the Marines fight, and they were learning. Not just tactics, but something deeper. They saw soldiers singing songs between firefights, cracking jokes in the middle of chaos, and never, ever, leaving a wounded comrade behind. Corporal Yoon's field hospital had become a symbol of the Alliance. She treated everyone equally, Terran and Valoran alike. When a Marine named Quan was brought in with a chest wound, she worked on him with the same care she showed for a Velaran civilian with a broken arm. "Why do you care so much?" asked Mindar, an elderly Valoran priest who had been helping in the hospital. "We are not your people." Yoon looked up from her work, her hands covered in blood. "Everyone is our people when they're dying. That's the rule. Doesn't matter what species you are." Mindar began writing in a journal he carried. He had decided to document everything, calling it The Chronicle of the Sky. Warriors. Future Valorans would need to know what happened here, would need to understand that there were still heroes in the galaxy. Commander Thilrax had taken his remaining soldiers and joined the Marine defensive positions. At first, the Valorans had been hesitant, unsure if they could match human ferocity, but as they fought alongside the Marines, something changed. The Valorans discovered courage they didn't know they possessed. During a particularly intense assault, Thilrax found himself fighting back-to-back with Sergeant Lee. A Korthak warrior nearly killed the Valoran commander before Lee put 3 rounds through its head. "Stay close," Lee shouted. And keep your barrel up. These things are fast. Why do you fight so hard for us? Thilrax asked, firing at another Korthak. You barely know us. Lee reloaded smoothly, never taking his eyes off the battle. Because you're worth fighting for. You're poets and philosophers, right? Builders, artists. The galaxy needs people like you. It's got plenty of warriors. What it doesn't have enough of is people who make life worth living. Those words struck Thilrax deeply. The Valorans had always thought themselves weak because they weren't warriors. But the humans saw strength in their art, their culture, their peaceful nature. It was a revelation. By the third day of fighting, the Korthak assault had slowed. They had lost tens of thousands of warriors against the Marine defensive line. But Warrior Prime Zalcor was not discouraged. The hive mind was patient. It had consumed hundreds of species over thousands of years. A few days of setbacks meant nothing. But then Engineer Han finished her project. She had created a chemical compound that, when dispersed in the air, blocked Korthak pheromone communication. The Marines loaded it into their standard smoke grenades and began deploying it across the battlefield. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Korthak warriors who had moved in perfect coordination suddenly became confused and disorganized. They stumbled over each other, attacked without proper support, and became easy targets. The Marines pressed the advantage, pushing the Korthak back district by district. In space, Major Kim noticed the change too. Captain, the bioships are responding slower. It's like they're drunk. Han's countermeasure is working, Lieutenant Park confirmed. The Korthak are losing cohesion across the entire system. For the first time since the battle began, Captain Daehyun allowed himself a moment of hope. They might actually win this. The Valorans might actually survive. But that hope was short-lived. Specialist Choi's console lit up with warning signals. Captain, I'm detecting massive energy readings at the edge of the system. Multiple contacts. Very large. The main view screen showed 3 enormous bioships entering the system. They were 10 times the size of the largest Korthak vessel they had encountered so far. These were devourer ships, planet killers designed to consume entire atmospheres. Time to planetary surface? Daehyun asked quietly. Park ran the calculations. 14 hours at current speed. Can we stop them? Park looked at the data and shook her head. Not with what we have. Those ships have armor too thick for our weapons. We'd need a full battle fleet. Daehyun stood, his face carved from stone. Then we evacuate as many Valorans as we can, and retreat. Captain, Lieutenant Park said. There are 3 million Valorans on that planet. We can save maybe 30,000. The rest will die. The bridge fell silent. Every officer knew what that meant. They had fought so hard, lost so many Marines, given the Valorans hope. And now, they would have to abandon them to die anyway. In his private quarters, Daehyun stared at the wall. He had never retreated from a battle in his life, never left people behind. But the math was brutal and unforgiving. 30,000 survivors was better than 0. His comm chirped. It was Sergeant Lee. Captain, the Marines request permission to address you. All of them. On the main hangar deck, 600 Marines stood at attention. They were battered, exhausted, and covered in the ichor of enemies they had killed. But their eyes were clear and determined. Sergeant Lee stepped forward. Captain, we've been talking. We know about the Devourer ships. We know Command will order evacuation. Sir, we request permission to stay and fight. That's suicide, Sergeant. Yes, sir. It is. But we didn't come here to save 30,000 Valorans. We came here to save 3 million. We'd like to finish the job. End quote. Daehyun looked at his Marines, these warriors who had followed him across the stars. I can't order you to die. Daehyun, you're not ordering us, sir. We're volunteering. Every single Marine nodded in agreement. Captain Kang Daehyun stood in the communications room, staring at the holographic image of Admiral Song. The Admiral's face was grave, but her orders were clear. Captain, Terran Fleet Command has reviewed the situation. The Devourer ships are beyond your capacity to stop. You are ordered to evacuate as many Valorans as possible and retreat to safe distance. We're dispatching a battle fleet, but they won't arrive for 6 days. By then, the planet will be gone. Admiral, my Marines want to stay. They want to fight, and I respect that. But I'm not sending 600 of humanity's best soldiers to die in an unwinnable battle. Follow your orders, Captain. That's final. The transmission ended. Dae-hyun stood alone in the silence, feeling the weight of command crushing down on him. He had 2 choices: obey orders and save some Valorans while condemning millions to death, or disobey orders, likely face court-martial, and attempt something that might be impossible. Lieutenant Park found him there an hour later. "Sir, Colonel Shin wants to speak with you. She's calling on a secure channel." Colonel Shin Murray appeared on the screen. She was Terran Command's liaison officer, known for being sympathetic, but always following regulations. "Kang, I know what you're thinking. Don't do it." 2. "We have a chance, Colonel. You have a suicide mission. Those Devourer ships will kill you all. Maybe. But there's another option. If we can destroy the Korthak hive node in this system, the swarm will lose coordination. Without the node, the Devourer ships might become directionless." Shin leaned back in her chair. "That node is aboard the largest bioship, protected by thousands of warriors. You'd have to fight through all of them, plant a virus or explosive, and get out before the ship's defenses kill you. The probability of success is less than 10%. 10% is better than 0, Colonel." Shin was quiet for a long moment. "If you do this and fail, there won't be anyone coming to save you. You'll be sacrificing 600 Marines for nothing. If we do nothing, 3 million Valorans die for certain. I'll take the 10% chance. Kang, if you disobey a direct order from Fleet Command, your career is over. Possibly your freedom too. They might imprison you for this." Dae-hyun smiled grimly. "Then I'd better succeed, or I won't be around to face the consequences." On the Valoran command station, High Chancellor Vex Thar gathered his council. Commander Thilrox had just explained the situation about the Devourer ships and the Terran evacuation order. "So they're leaving," one council member said bitterly. "I knew. No one would truly fight for us." "No," Thilrox said firmly. "Captain Dae-hyun is defying his orders. He's going to attack the hive node. He's risking everything for us. That's insane. They'll all die, probably. But they're doing it anyway." Vexthar stood, his aquatic features set with determination. "Then we will fight alongside them. If the Terrans are willing to die for us, the least we can do is die with them. Chancellor, our soldiers are exhausted. We have perhaps 200 left who can still fight. Then 200 will have to be enough. I will not let these humans die alone for our world." In the engineering bay, Engineer Han Sora and tech specialist Bae Junho were working frantically on a computer virus. They had captured several intact Korthak biocomputers and were reverse engineering them. The Korthak systems were organic, part biological and part technological. It was like nothing human science had encountered before. "If we can get this virus into the hive node's neural center, it should cascade through their entire network," Han explained to Captain Dae-hyun. "But someone has to physically upload it. The Korthak biosystems don't accept wireless transmissions. It's a defensive feature." "How close do they need to be?" Dae-hyun asked. "Within arm's reach of the node's core. And they'll need to hold position for at least 90 seconds while the upload completes. 90 seconds, surrounded by Korthak warriors in the heart of their hive ship." "Yes, sir." "It's a death sentence." Sergeant Lee had been listening to the conversation. "I'll do it. I've got the most combat experience. I can hold that position." Dae-hyun looked at the soldier who had served with him for 10 years. "Yes, sir. I'm volunteering to save 3 million lives. That's a pretty good trade for one sergeant." Corporal Yoon was preparing her medical supplies when Sergeant Lee found her. She looked up and immediately knew something was wrong. You're going on the suicide mission. It's not a suicide mission. It's a mission with acceptable casualties. That's military speak for suicide mission. Yoon's hands shook as she packed bandages. Come back alive. Hyunwoo. That's an order. I'll do my best, Sunmi. But if I don't, someone needs to tell my sister what happened. Tell her I died doing something that mattered. Before Yoon could respond, the ship's alarm sounded. The mission was beginning. The strike force was 50 Terran Marines and 20 Valoran soldiers. It was all they could spare without leaving the planet defenseless. They boarded assault shuttles and launched toward the massive Korthak hive ship that contained the node. Private Nam sat across from a young Valoran soldier named Talven. The Valoran was terrified but trying to hide it. Nam understood the feeling completely. First time attacking an enemy ship? Nam asked. First time attacking anything before this week, Talven replied. I was a student, studied poetry. Yeah? Songs about the ocean, about peace and beauty. Stupid things now. Not stupid, Nam said. Those are the things worth fighting for. Peace and beauty. I hope you get to write more poems after this. The shuttles punched through the hive ship's organic hull, breaching directly into the interior. The strike force poured out into a nightmare of biological architecture and waiting Korthak warriors. The battle was immediate and brutal. The Korthak knew they were coming and had prepared a welcome. Hundreds of warriors attacked from all directions. The Marines formed a tight formation, using overlapping fire to cut down anything that moved. Sergeant Lee led the advance toward the node's location, following the schematic that Engineer Han had provided. Behind him, Marines and Valorans fought and died together. Talven took a hit to the shoulder but kept fighting, firing his energy rifle with tears streaming down his face. Private Nam dragged wounded soldiers to cover, both human and Valoran, refusing to leave anyone behind. Commander Thilrax fought with a fury he didn't know he possessed. Every Korthak he killed was revenge for his family, his people, his world. When a warrior knocked his weapon away, he drew a blade and fought hand to hand, screaming the names of his lost children. The strike force pushed deeper into the ship, leaving a trail of bodies behind them. They lost soldiers with every step, but they kept moving forward, because stopping meant death for everyone. Finally, they reached the chamber containing the hive node. It was a massive, organic structure, pulsing with light and energy. Warrior Prime Zalcor himself guarded it, larger than any Korthak they had seen before. Around him stood an honor guard of elite warriors. Go, Lee shouted. I'll handle this. The sergeant charged forward, his rifle firing on full automatic. He killed 3 elite warriors before they even reacted. Then, Zalcor attacked. Moving with terrifying speed, Lee dodged, rolled, and fired. But the Warrior Prime was too strong. A claw caught Lee across the chest, tearing through his armor. He fell, blood pouring from the wound. But he kept crawling toward the node, the virus upload device clutched in his hand. Private Nam saw what was happening and made a decision. He threw himself at Zalcor, his combat knife finding a gap in the creature's armor. The Warrior Prime roared and threw Nam across the room, but it bought Lee precious seconds. The sergeant reached the node and jammed the upload device into its core. The device activated, and the virus began transferring. Lee held onto the node with one hand, firing his sidearm at approaching warriors with the other. 30 seconds, he muttered. Just give me 30 seconds. Corporal Yoon appeared at his side, her medical pack abandoned. She had followed the strike force against orders. She fired her rifle at anything that moved, protecting Lee while the upload continued. Told you to stay back, Lee said, coughing blood. Never was good at following orders, Yoon replied. The upload completed. The virus erupted through the Korthak network like wildfire. Every bioship in the system shuddered as their coordination collapsed. The Devourer ships, halfway to the planet, suddenly went dormant, drifting in space. On the Indomitable, Lieutenant Park watched her screens in amazement. "Captain, it worked. The Korthak network is down. The Devourer ships have stopped." Captain Daehyun allowed himself to breathe. All ships, full offensive, hit them while they're disorganized. The Terran ship and the remaining Valoran fleet attacked with everything they had. The Korthak, without their hive coordination, were vulnerable. Bioships died by the dozens. In the node chamber, the strike force fought their way back to the shuttles. They carried Sergeant Lee, who was barely conscious, but alive. Private Nam supported Talven, who had lost a lot of blood but was still reciting poetry under his breath. When they finally reached the Indomitable, they had lost 23 Marines and 8 Valorans. But they had saved 3 million lives. Matriarch Silvera, the eldest living Valoran, came to the ship personally. She carried a data crystal containing the complete archive of Valoran culture, history, and art. She handed it to Captain Daehyun with trembling hands. "If we had died today, this would have been all that remained of our people. Now we can rebuild. Because of you." Daehyun accepted the crystal with respect. "Your civilization is worth preserving, Matriarch. The galaxy is better with poetry in it." The final battle began 3 days after the hive node fell. The Korthak were leaderless and disorganized, but they were still dangerous. Without the hive coordination, each bioship became its own small unit, operating on instinct rather than strategy. In some ways, this made them more unpredictable. Captain Kang Dae-hyun stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the tactical display. The Terran reinforcement fleet had arrived early, drawn by reports of the impossible victory. Now, 20 human warships joined the fight, and the tide turned completely. "All ships, coordinated assault pattern," Daehyun ordered. "Let's finish this." The combined human and Valoran fleet moved as one, cutting through the remaining Korthak vessels with surgical precision. Major Kim Taejin's fighter squadrons hunted down the smaller bioships, while the capital ships hammered the larger ones with railguns and missiles. On the planet's surface, the Marines had pushed the Korthak completely out of the capital city. Sergeant Lee Hyunwoo, still recovering from his wounds, watched from the medical bay as Private Nam led the final assault on the last Korthak stronghold. The private had changed during the battle. He was no longer the scared young man who had dropped onto the planet. He had become a warrior. But more importantly, the Velorans had changed too. Commander Thilrax had taken the volunteers who fought in the hive ship and formed them into the first unit of a new military academy. They called themselves the Sky Guard, named after the humans who had fallen from the sky to save them. Corporal Yoon Sunmi worked tirelessly in the field hospital, treating the final wave of wounded. The fighting was almost over, but the casualties were still coming in. She had saved hundreds of lives, both human and Valoran. When this was all done, she would probably have nightmares for years, but she would also have the knowledge that she made a difference. Engineer Han Sora and tech specialist Bae Junho were examining captured Korthak technology. Even in defeat, the swarm had left behind valuable intelligence. They had mapped the Korthak's movements through this region of space, identified other systems under attack, and discovered something remarkable. "Captain," Han reported, "the Korthak have absorbed genetic material from dozens of species. Their organic database contains memories and cultural information from civilizations that supposedly went extinct centuries ago. If we can decode it, we might be able to restore some of what was lost." Daehyun considered this carefully. "That's a project for scientists, not soldiers. But make sure the data is preserved. Those civilizations deserve to be remembered." In space, the last major Korthak bioship was destroyed. The 3 Devourer ships remained dormant, their systems too damaged by the virus to ever reactivate. Eventually, human engineers would salvage them for study, but for now, they served as monuments to a battle that should have been lost. Lieutenant Park checked her status boards. "Captain, all Korthak forces in the system have been eliminated. The Valoran homeworld is secure." The bridge crew erupted in cheers. They had done it. against impossible odds, with outdated orders, and with a fraction of the forces that military doctrine said they needed, they had won. But the victory came with a heavy price. 147 Marines had died in the fighting. 89 more were wounded, some so badly they would never fight again. The Valoran losses were even worse. 112 soldiers dead, and thousands of civilians lost before the Terrans arrived. The memorial service was held in the central square of the Valoran capital. High Chancellor Vex Thar stood beside Captain Daehyun as names were read aloud. Terran Marines stood shoulder to shoulder with Valoran Skyguard, honoring the fallen of both species. When it was his turn to speak, Vex Thar addressed the crowd with tears in his eyes. We sent a message into space, a surrender, expecting only death. Instead, we found something we thought had vanished from the galaxy. We found honor. We found courage. We found friends who bled for us when they had no reason to. The Terrans gave us more than survival. They gave us hope. Captain Daehyun spoke next, his voice steady but emotional. The Marines we lost here died defending people they had never met. They died so that poets and artists and philosophers could continue creating beauty in a harsh universe. That's the mission. That's what we fight for. Not territory. Not resources. We fight so that civilization can continue. We fight so that people like the Velorans can live in peace. After the ceremony, Private Nam found the Valoran child he had saved during the first battle. The child's parents had invited him to their home, wanting to thank him properly. They served him traditional Valoran food and sang songs from before the war. Nam sat there, surrounded by the family he had saved, and finally understood why he had become a soldier. Sergeant Lee was recovering slowly but surely. The doctors said he would survive, though he would carry scars for the rest of his life. Corporal Yoon visited him every day, bringing fresh bandages and terrible jokes to keep his spirits up. You know, Lee said during one visit, I thought I was going to die in that hive ship. So did I, Yoon admitted. That's why I followed you in. Couldn't let you die alone. That was really stupid, Sunmi. Yeah, well, I learned from the best. They both smiled. Soldiers knew that some bonds were forged in fire and could never be broken. They had saved each other's lives multiple times. That created a connection deeper than words could express. Commander Thilrax approached Captain Daehyun in the command center one evening. The Valoran military commander had been working with Terran trainers to establish proper defensive protocols for his people. Captain, I have a question that has bothered me since you arrived. Why do humans fight so hard? You have your own worlds, your own people. You could have ignored our surrender message. Why risk everything for strangers? Daehyun looked out at the Valoran city, now lit with lights as it began to rebuild. Because we've been where you are, Commander. Humanity's history is full of wars, genocides, and near extinctions. We almost destroyed ourselves a dozen times. We know what it's like to face annihilation, and we learned something important from all that suffering. Civilization is fragile. It needs to be protected. When we heard your surrender, we heard our own ancestors crying out for help that never came. We couldn't ignore that. Thilrax was quiet for a moment. You see strength in our art and culture. We always thought ourselves weak because we weren't warriors. You're strong because you're worth defending, Lieutenant Park said, joining the conversation. The galaxy has plenty of warriors, Commander. What it lacks is people who create beauty and meaning. That's what makes life worth living. We're just the people who make sure you survive to do it. Day. End quote. A month after the battle ended, priest-scholar Mindar completed his chronicle of the events. He called it The Day the Sky Answered. The document spread throughout the galaxy, carried by Valoran refugees and human traders. Other species read it with growing amazement. The Terrans had fought and died for people they didn't know. They had defied orders to save strangers. They had shown that mercy and strength could exist together. It was a message that resonated across the stars. 17 other civilizations sent requests to Terran Command, asking for help against the Korthak. The swarm had been terrorizing this region of space for centuries, and most species thought resistance was futile. But the Valorans had proven it wasn't, and the humans had shown how to win. The Terran-Valoran alliance was formalized 3 months later. It became the foundation for a larger coalition of species, united against the Korthak threat. The Valorans contributed their scientific knowledge and diplomatic skills. The humans provided military training and defensive support. Together, they began building something that had never existed in this part of the galaxy. A true alliance based on mutual respect and shared sacrifice. Private Nam decided to stay on the Valoran homeworld as a cultural liaison. He had formed too many connections to leave. Besides, someone needed to help translate between warrior thinking and poet thinking. He was uniquely qualified, being a warrior who had learned to appreciate poetry. Talven, the Valoran who had fought beside him in the Hive ship, survived his wounds and became a teacher. He taught young Valorans about the humans who had saved them, making sure the next generation would understand the sacrifice that was made. Captain Daehyun faced no court-martial for disobeying orders. Instead, he received a medal and a promotion. Terran Command had learned an important lesson. Sometimes the right decision wasn't the safe one. Sometimes you had to risk everything to do what was right. 1 year after the battle, Daehyun returned to the Valoran homeworld for a ceremony. The Valorans had built a monument in the central square, a massive structure of crystal and metal. It listed the names of every Terran and Valoran who died in the battle. At the top, inscribed in both languages, was a simple phrase: "They answered when we called." Captain Daehyun stood before the monument with High Chancellor Vexthar and Lieutenant Park. Around them, the city thrived with life. Children played in the streets. Artists displayed their work. Musicians performed in the parks. It was everything they had fought to preserve. "Do you regret it?" Vexthar asked. "All the soldiers you lost, all the risk you took, was it worth it?" Daehyun watched a group of Valoran children running past, laughing and playing. One of them was the child that Private Nam had saved. Every single one of those Marines died so that those kids could grow up and have normal lives. "Yeah, Chancellor, it was worth it. We will never forget what you did for us," Vexthar said. "We know," Park replied. "That's why we did it. Because some things are worth remembering. Some things are worth dying for. And some things, like your civilization, are worth saving." In orbit above the planet, the Indomitable prepared to depart for another mission. The ship had been repaired and reinforced. A new group of Marines had joined the crew, replacing those who had fallen. They had all heard the stories of the battle. They all knew what the ship represented. As the Indomitable pulled away from the planet, a message came through from Valoran Command. It was simple and direct. "Thank you for answering our call. May your journey be safe, and may you always find people worth fighting for." Captain Daehyun smiled and sent a response. "We will." That's what we do. The ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, heading toward the next crisis, the next battle, the next desperate call for help. Because that was the mission. Not to conquer, not to dominate, but to stand in the gap between civilization and chaos. To answer when others called. To show that in a dark and dangerous galaxy, there were still people willing to fight for what was right. The Terran Marines had proven something important. They had shown that surrender didn't have to be the end. That hope could survive even the darkest moments. That sometimes, when you sent a message into the void, someone answered, and when humans answered, they brought more than just weapons. They brought courage, compassion, and an absolute refusal to let good people die alone. The galaxy would never be the same. The Korthak had learned that humans were dangerous, but more importantly, every species that heard the story learned something else. When humans said they would fight for you, they meant it. When they promised protection, they delivered. And when they stood beside you, they never, ever ran away. Private Nam stood on the roof of his new home, watching the Indomitable disappear into the stars. Beside him, young Talvin recited a new poem he had written. It was about warriors who fell from the sky, and the hope they carried with them. "That's beautiful," Nam said when the poem ended. "You should publish it." "I will," Talvin replied. "The galaxy needs to know what happened here. They need to know that heroes still exist." Nam nodded, thinking of Sergeant Lee, Corporal Yoon, and all the others who had fought and died here. "Yeah, they do. And we need to make sure their sacrifice meant something. We need to build something worth the price they paid." The two of them stood there, warrior and poet, human and Valoran, watching the stars and dreaming of a better future. A future that was only possible because someone had answered a desperate call. A future that proved civilization could survive as long as there were people willing to fight for it. And somewhere out in space, the Indomitable carried that mission forward, ready to answer the next call, ready to face the next impossible battle. Because that was what Terran Marines did. They protected those who couldn't protect themselves. They stood when others fell. And they never, ever accepted surrender when there was still hope. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Humanity had arrived, and they brought with them something that had been missing for too long. They brought the promise that no one had to face darkness alone, that someone would always answer the call. And for the Valorans, and for every species that would follow, that made all the difference.